And this is a Fox News alert. New concerns about the threat posed by the ISIS terror network to the homeland. Fox's own Doug McKelway, he's standing by tonight in Washington. He has all the details. Doug.
Hi, Sean. There was a quiet bombshell thrown in the midst of today's House Homeland Security Committee hearing on new terror threats to the homeland. Asked by Congressman Jason Chaffetz if he was aware that on September 10th, 4 individuals with known ties to terrorist organizations in the Middle East were caught trying to cross the Texas border. DHS Secretary Jay Johnson said, quote, "I don't know how much credence to give them, but I've heard reports to that effect." Chaffetz then went on to cite DHS's own statistics that it's not just Mexican or Central Americans being apprehended at the border.
We've apprehended people from 143 different countries. 143 countries. According to the internal statistics, 13 were from Syria, 6 were from Iraq, 4 were from Iran.
Secretary Johnson said that anywhere from 70 to 90% of illegal border crossers are apprehended, and he suggested that a pathway to citizenship for them would lower the terrorism risk here.
I am very focused on knowing as much as we can about individuals who are undocumented in this country. And I believe that if an earned path to citizenship were to become law, that would encourage people to come forward and submit to a background check.
Do we honestly believe that any would-be terrorists or criminal or drug dealer is going to come forward to have a criminal background check done on them?
The committee heard that despite ISIS's growth, it is al-Qaeda that remains the biggest terrorist threat, and the fight for supremacy between the two may be driving up recruitment for both of them as each vies for media attention. Sean, back to you.
All right, Doug, thank you. Meanwhile, President Obama delivered remarks on the fight against ISIS earlier today, where he reiterated that no ground troops will be a part of his strategy. Watch this.
I will not commit you and the rest of our armed forces to fighting another ground war in Iraq. After a decade of massive ground deployments, it is more effective to use our unique capabilities in support of partners on the ground so they can secure their own country's futures. And that's the only solution that will succeed over the long term.
However, there are now 3 senior military leaders who have said the exact opposite and have urged the president to now consider it. Now, first, Army Chief of Staff General Odierno, who told the New York Times this afternoon, quote, "Well, we've got to hit the ground forces that are capable of going in and rooting them out." And just hours earlier, former Defense Secretary Robert Gates, he said this.
The reality is they're not going to be able to be successful against ISIS strictly from the air, or strictly depending on the Iraqi forces or the Peshmerga or the Sunni tribes acting on their own. So there will be boots on the ground if there's to be any hope of success in the strategy.
Now, both of those comments come just one day after the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, put the prospect of boots on the ground back on the table.
My view at this point is that this coalition is the appropriate way forward. I believe that will prove true. But if it fails to be true, and if there are threats to the United States, then I, of course, would go back to the president and make a recommendation that may include the use of U.S. military ground forces.
Here with reaction to all this and more, nationally syndicated radio talk show host, the great one, Mark Levin. JV, boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. One part of the administration is saying destroy, then we'll manage, then international coalitions. Have you ever witnessed such incoherence in your life, Mark?
No, we're surrounded by knuckleheads, and the problem is they're supposed to be protecting the country. First of all, it's September 17th, so happy Constitution Day, or what's left of the Constitution Day. What the House has done, let me just say, this is extraordinary. They've given the president authority to train 5,000 moderate whatevers in Syria. I guess they know who's what. This is very interesting to me, Sean. So the president doesn't think he needs congressional approval, declaration of war, or what have you, to bomb, but apparently he needs congressional approval to arm 5,000 whatevers. This is very odd. I just want to point this out. You actually have a revolt going on with the top generals in Obama. I'm not talking about tanks pulling up to the White House and so forth. These men are trying to communicate to the American people that they are military men, and we cannot defeat this enemy unless we use all of our armed forces and armed services. That's number one. Number two, Obama does not view this as a military action. He keeps telling us it's not a war, it's not a war. For him, the truth is, it's about politics. It's about containing this issue politically for him so he can focus on fundamentally transforming America. And this is a very serious matter to understand. So the generals and the military see this quite differently than our very political president, who really doesn't want to defeat this enemy. Or he would go to Congress, get a declaration of war, unleash hell on these cockroaches, and then get out. Instead, he speaks to our military men and tells them, don't worry, no combat boots on the ground. He has said it 1,000 times so every one of our enemies in every single language can understand under this so-called commander-in-chief, he has no intention of defeating them, period.
All right, look, I agree with you it's political, but I'm more cynical maybe even than you are. I think this is just to get past the midterm election. I don't think it's any deeper than that. I don't think this president has any intention of fighting the war that they've declared against us.
I think it's to get past the Obama administration. He just doesn't want to deal with this. He sees his numbers are low, so he'll do the absolute minimum. I mean, the American people, he says he's brought this wonderful coalition together, but they're keeping it secret. Have you ever heard anything so stupid in your life? There is no coalition. And then he's talking about training 5,000 moderate whatevers, 5,000 against 35,000. Who are these 5,000? Then he says we're going to use our Air Force, but we have to limit civilian casualties. Well, how are we going to use our Air Force, attack the enemy where it is in Syria, and limit civilian casualties? These generals, the Joint Chief of Staff and the rest of them, they see this as the disaster that it is. So do we.
All right. Then frankly, for Bob Gates to speak out as he did, I think speaks volumes. What about the rest of these generals? They're going to be in charge of this thing, and then they, you know, Chairman Dempsey said, well, I'll go back to the president. The president's not going to change his mind about boots on the ground. So that means we're destined for failure. That means that the war will be engaged against us. You know, Prime Minister Netanyahu said first, you know, there was the master race, now there's the master faith. I don't think the president has a clue about the caliphate. What does that mean for the average American when these guys get here?
I honestly don't think he gives a damn, as hard as that is to believe. How else do you explain him not securing the southern border? How else do you explain to him being on vacation while this whole thing is breaking out? How else do you explain sending 3,000 troops to Liberia and other places to fight Ebola while we don't have 3,000 troops at his direction on the border and so forth and so on? The fact of the matter is, if this is a war and we want victory, we can defeat them, we can wipe these cockroaches out. If he wants to do something short of that, obviously he can, but I think it's time for Mr. Boehner and Mr. McConnell and people to rise up and say, we want to know if you want victory, if you're going to call this a war, we will do a declaration of war, but we're not going to piddle around like this for political reasons.
But Mark, we watched as we've lost 4,000 men in Iraq. They shed their blood, they gave great sacrifice, others lost their limbs, and then city after city fell and the president did nothing. Why would anyone be convinced that he's serious about dealing with it now after the fact?
Well, we're not. And I want to say something now that you brought that up, because that's hugely important, and I know a lot of Gold Star families. I, on behalf of many people watching, many people in this country, want to apologize to you. I want you to know that your sons and daughters are heroes. They did exactly the right thing. I want to apologize to you for this phony commander-in-chief who cut and run, and as a result helped build up this enemy, this ISIS, ISIL, Schmeisel, whatever the hell it is, these terrorists, these cockroaches that we're now having to deal with, or should deal with, once and for all. And you know what? It just amazes me. Do we want to win wars anymore? Because we know how to win them. We remember how we won World War II. If this enemy is as serious as an enemy as the Secretary of Defense and the head of the Joint Chiefs and everybody else knows them to be, then we have to attack them where they are. And unfortunately, that's in Syria.
All right, the great one, Mark Levin, nationally syndicated radio talk shows. Thanks for being with us, Mark. And coming up next tonight here on Hannity.
Has Rand Paul ever been to Syria? Has he ever met with ISIS? Has he ever met with any of these people? No. We're going to have a fight because it's patently false.
All right, Senator McCain was not holding back about his Republican colleague when I spoke to him earlier this week. Coming up next, Senator Rand Paul, he'll respond to that and more.